but anyway. So welcome everyone. Nice to see you all, and thank you for taking some time out for us today to talk about this project. We're super excited. I will hand over very soon to our industry brains trust in Austral Fisheries and our project manager Tom Cosentino and our principal investigator and tech head in the team, Alan Harrington, very soon. I just wanted to give a bit of background around SIA's involvement in the project and why we think it's. I think it's clear why it's such a critical project and why we need to work on it. But from an SIA perspective, we watched the 2016 announcement of Austral Fisheries who went carbon neutral, and we thought that was a huge effort and something that industry really needed to follow, and yet the extension across to the rest of the industry didn't actually happen the way that we expected it to happen. And the leadership that was shown by Austral, and I know the benefits to their business are absolutely clear, the benefits to industry didn't quite translate in terms of following suit. So when it became known that David Carter was going to build a boat and that he was going to go on a journey that is huge and important for industry, it was really important for SIA that we were part of that journey and tried to support that journey as best we could, for many reasons, but also because we think that being able to bring industry along and extend the work and the information and the learning through that project across industry was super important, so that this time round we actually get to see those impacts and those improvements across industry. So we commend Austral Fisheries for their leadership as always. It's fascinating to watch them work, and it's really pleasing to watch the drive and the determination that they use to climb these mountains for industry. And we look forward to being a supporter in that. I know my sound's not great, so I'm going to stop there and hand over to Tom Cosentino to take it from here and bring in Alan and David. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, V. Appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good to see so many folks online for this webinar. My name's Tom Cosentino, project managing this project on behalf of SIA. I work with a number of agricultural and other primary industries. Seafood will always be closest to my heart. It was the industry that gave me my break, you could say. So it was a real pleasure for V to ring me up and ask me to project manage this for SIA. And it's also a really good area to work in, just from a professional perspective. Climate resilience is certainly one that all other industries are focused on in the primary production space. And it's really good to see seafood stepping up, not just one company stepping up, but the industry attempting to follow. This project is essentially about presenting a snapshot of available fuel and propulsion system alternatives to the industry, with a view to reducing the commercial fishing industry's carbon emissions. That was my sentence, this project distilled into a sentence. There is a big picture behind all of this. In addition to climate resilience and facing climate change, which is something that I accept that our industry cannot battle alone, but certainly needs to be a player at the table. I think it's time for the industry to be a mature primary industry with a carbon reduction vision and actually having rubber on the road when it comes to carbon reduction. What I don't want to see for seafood is to be the last primary industry with a fossil fuel embedded in its supply chain and constantly having to defend why that's the case. Certainly don't want to see in a decade or even less than a decade that our products aren't on supermarket shelves because supermarkets don't want to use their carbon credits to offset our footprint. And that's something that other industries are working really hard to ensure they don't need to have that discussion with retailers, not just overseas markets, but our own here. There is also a micro picture to this project, and that is that our industry relies on diesel. It is very expensive. Eliminating that from our profit and loss statement, I think, is a really attractive proposition, or replacing it with something that's not as expensive, besides the climate goal that your business might have, or carbon emission reduction goal that you might have. There's also a need as a sustainable, any sort of business, but our fishing industry business as well, to replace assets. And certainly I know there are people on the call today who in the next few years will be looking to replace their vessels, and you do have to make a decision about what's going to power it. It's like any business, your tractor, your car, you need to make a decision about what takes the place of your old assets. There's also something that's a really sort of nice to have thing, which I've discovered in my work with the technical team, is that a lot of these alternate operating systems are very quiet. So you can spend a lot of time out at sea without the rumble of a diesel engine in your ear. And that's a really underestimated benefit, I think. Just talk about fatigue, or not having fatigue, or being able to do other things on board rather than just covering your ears and hoping for the best sort of thing. So what I want to deliver in this project is a documented suite of alternatives that industry can take and then build on. You will have to do some of your own research to make sure these alternatives suit your business's needs. But we also want to identify any barriers to their installation and present them in a neat report. I also want to put together, and this webinar is greatly assisting that, a list of names and faces of early adopters to call on as we progress through the project, and we look to start matching sellers of equipment with purchasers of equipment. And being, I suppose, in front of the game with that will assist us to potentially shape their products so they better suit us and not other industries. Lastly, I'd like to have a document that we can give to government and other industry peak bodies that tells them what the fishing industry's needs are, so that they can fully understand what their responsibility might be in helping us to achieve our carbon reduction goals. And there'll be no guesswork when they put their own policies together about how to achieve different infrastructure at wharves and so on. And before anyone makes the joke, we're not looking at sales, Gary Barnes. That's off the table. We're looking at mechanical propulsion systems only. I think you'd understand that. So that's a layperson's summary of the project, and hand things over now to the technical man, Alan Haratonian.
Thanks, Tom. What a great intro and a tough act to follow. So I'm going to kind of dive very quickly, rapid fire, straight into kind of the tech geeky stuff, and if I lose anyone, we'll have plenty of time once I wrap up to for you guys to ask questions. So I'm going to go hard and fast and hopefully not lose any of you. So just I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen there?
Yep.
Wonderful. So I'll just dive straight into alternative fuels. And you can't have any conversations about alternative fuels without factoring in volumetric energy density. So I'm diving straight into the hardcore techie stuff. So essentially, this illustration is the simplest thing I could find that says diesel is very energy dense. It's going to be very difficult to find and almost impossible to find a one-to-one comparison from a energy density perspective. All the other major alternatives such as methanol, ammonia, liquid hydrogen and batteries will require a lot more room on vessels. For the purposes of for this discussion and how much time I've got to present this information, I'm going to kind of jump 2 or 3 months further into our journey that we've been on, and say that we are tending to lean towards methanol as the fuel, the optimal fuel of choice. And this head-to-head comparison pretty much kind of sums up why. Whilst from an energy density perspective, it's got about half the energy density of diesel, it also costs about half the amount of the current price for diesel. From a this is a tonnage perspective, but the calculations play out from a per litre perspective as well. From a grey methanol perspective, that is, which is sourced from natural gas as opposed to green hydrogen. Grey methanol is available. Its environmental impact is vastly different to that of diesel, in that diesel is toxic and carcinogenic, non-biodegradable, whereas methanol has about a 24-hour half-life. So if it gets into a body of water within a short order of time, you'll never know that there was actually a spill at all. But most importantly, when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions or emission reductions, you can see there that even grey methanol that is sourced from natural gas has significant reductions in greenhouse gases. So that in that bottom section of that middle column, you'll see that there are significant reductions. So any type of conversion to methanol could deliver significant greenhouse gas emissions well ahead of any kind of 2030 target. So we could be ahead of the curve. So when we talk about methanol, there's kind of this diagram's quite busy, but effectively there's kind of, let's call it, two primary pathways. One of them is basically creating green methanol from green hydrogen. So it plays well into the Australia's kind of, let's call it, green hydrogen superpower story, the direction that we are going as a nation, which I'm fully in support of. But most of the methanol that's currently available around the world is still sourced from natural gas. So it's called grey methanol as opposed to green methanol. And nevertheless, there are still greenhouse gas emission advantages. In this particular project, we have had a focus vessel, which is the Calypso Star, which is a Darwin-based demersal trap fishing vessel. I won't go into too much detail there. I'll leave that to the Austral guys to talk about if the time permits. I'm going to dive into methanol usage to show you that it currently is available and being used in the marine environment by a variety of different businesses. So the Stena Germanica is it's a Ropax ferry. It was converted back in 2015 to methanol, and those guys there are now moving to actually cleaning up the methanol supply that they're getting. So they're basically using a cleaner version of methanol, which is basically green methanol from alternative sources. So yeah, so that's been out there in the wild, working perfectly fine since 2015. More recently, these are all EU funded, part funded projects. The Fast Water project is Swedish Maritime Authority decided to convert all of their pilot vessels. And so, so they're now methanol powered and producing a lot less emissions and a lot less noise, because the octane content of methanol makes the diesel motor, the compression diesel motor, operate with less noise. And then one slightly left of field example is methanol usage outside of marine industries, and that's in IndyCar. So there was a big accident, or a series of accidents, in 1964. IndyCar, in 65, they decided to switch to methanol. They ran it till 2005, and the only reason they switched back to using an ethanol blend is because there was a whole bunch of ethanol lobbyists from the massive corn industry, who threw money at the problem and said, use our ethanol, we need a good branding exercise for ethanol. In terms of engine technologies, I will focus on one particular engine from a particular engine manufacturer, because I think it really does set the benchmark of where this technology could go. So the Anglo-Belgian Corporation, or ABC Engines as it's otherwise known, has created a new engine that's it's fuel flexible. So it basically has the pilot fuel is diesel. So there's a short burst of diesel, roughly about 5%, that's injected into the cylinder. The rest of the fuel that's injected is methanol or any other type. And so the way they've developed their engine, as you can see here, is for it to be flexible to accept any type of fuel for that kind of, let's call it the 95% of the blend, with diesel being the 5%. So this particular engine, if the vessel operator chose to, could continue running it on diesel for as long as possible. So there's no cutting off diesel at the knees and then having to make a disruptive change. It's more of an evolution of the engine rather than revolutionary change. So an easier and less risky for the vessel operators to adopt. All you basically do is kind of interchangeable components in one particular section. What you're doing is changing the fuel injectors, and hey presto, you have a fuel flexible and future safe propulsion option. The guys from John Deere who make marine propulsion engines, their 9-litre engine should be coming out late next year with a methanol option. They've invested in a US company called Clearflame that developed some technology out of Stanford. So that's coming down the pipeline. Better known businesses or engine providers to the marine sector, being Caterpillar and Cummins, are making significant investments in methanol engines. So those products should be, let's call it, hitting the shelves fairly soon. And also MTU, which is a Rolls-Royce business, is also developing high-speed 4-stroke methanol engines. So where does that leave us? So that's the end of the kind of tech speak. So my kind of final thoughts in wrapping up, I would say fishers who are planning new builds should be factoring in volumetric energy density and alternative fuels into their discussions with naval architects for new builds. When vessel operators are planning replacing of older engines that have been around for a bit too long, they're a bit long in the tooth. Dual fuel engines should be on the radar, should be considered. Now, granted, some of these engines that are available now are still in the mid-range section, mid-speed, but when the high-speed ones become readily available and, from all the major manufacturers, I would say dual fuel should be on the radar. There's an increasing number of maritime organisations that are switching to methanol or planning to switch wholesale and moving away from marine kind of diesel and marine diesel variants. AP Moller Maersk being the leader of the pack at the moment, but Stena Line has got vessels out there in the wild using methanol. So from a dual fuel engine conversion, that should be also considered. So you don't actually need to replace the entire engine. So those organisations that are used to running their engines for 20 or 30 years, and they don't generally do the full swap out, you could actually just run new fuel lines, and a bigger fuel tank, specific fuel pumps and fuel injectors, and obviously update your ECU to be able to control these different types of fuel mixtures. But engine conversions are a lower capex proposition for fleet operators who either, for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, don't want to get into a new build or don't want to replace the existing engine. So there are a number of pathways to explore. So that's it from me. over to you, Jessica or Tom. I'm just going to stop my screen sharing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Al. It's always slightly terrifying for me when I see how your brain operates, but a lot of amazing information there. I think now we might be going to move to opening up the floor to a couple of questions. I appreciate that people may have a few that they want to ask. We can either do that by raising your hand and we can move to people, or if you're more comfortable to pop something into the chat, you're very welcome to go that way. Gary.
Yeah, thank you. With changing a vessel's engine propulsion system and going to this new technology or whatever's available, methanol would be similar weight. But some of the other scenarios, when you can't put up a like-for-like scenario, AMSA will make you resurvey your vessel as a brand new vessel, even though it's 20 years old. And this could be quite out of the question for a lot of vessels older vessels wanting to adopt something in the newer technology.
Yeah, I personally haven't had a lot of interactions with AMSA over the years, and so I'm probably not best placed to answer AMSA-related questions. David, do you have? I know we've talked about potential implications of AMSA's view on some of these explorations. Do you have a viewpoint there?
They are coming a bit late to the party. There's no doubt there's some unique challenges, safety challenges with methanol. It's a corrosive chemical. Its transport, distribution and storage is now a bit more involved. It's slightly different, but on balance, we opted for non-gaseous fuel. So the great contest in marine propulsion, Gary, is going to be around ammonia and methanol. Hydrogen's not going to work. And we know the problems with ammonia. It's just that's even more nasty and more toxic. Methanol has some other issues. So it's if it's running in engines, there's special lubrication requirements for engines that need to be thought about. The technology readiness kind of considerations are important. So dropping fuels into environments where engineers and stuff need to be broadly familiar with how these things work has been a consideration right through. And when we've spoken to AMSA, it's been certainly for the larger vessels that are in class, they've tended to revert to lean on the classification societies. So that conversation will have to evolve. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. A simple re-engineering would potentially be simple enough, but with fuel tanks, we're going to have to provide coatings. Fuel lines will have to be stainless steel or something resilient to methanol, and then just subtle things like fire alarms and detectors will struggle to detect a methanol fire because it's a clear burning flame. So none of this stuff's going to be simple, but the principles that Al's outlined will be around the volumetric density. So boats that are already sort of using all their diesel fuel tankage, they will be hard to retrofit.
Yeah, I see one of the participants had the name down as a potential person here today was Adam Brancher from down at Tasmania, Kedge Marine. I think he was involved in setting up a lot of these new rules back in 2017-18. So it would be good to have his opinion on some of this stuff as well.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gary. Really interesting question there. I've got one in the chat from Andy Myers from Oysters Australia asking if there are methanol outboards available or evolving. Al, I imagine that's probably one for you.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I flagged and am pursuing in terms of lines of inquiry with the guys from the Methanol Institute in Singapore and some variety of different technology providers from China. A lot of the methanol technology for internal combustion engines has been led by the Chinese. The Chinese are using methanol in large quantities for transportation. If it's available, it'll probably be already have been done in China. So within the next week, I would say that I would have an answer to that question, but I'll have to get back to you. So happy to have a conversation offline about Outboard Motors. Whilst we're talking about Outboard Motors, I might just also touch on the fact that when Clayton and I went to the Hybrid and Electric Marine Expo in Amsterdam, it became quite clear that fishing vessels that were, let's call them day boats, you know, they're going out for a few hours and then coming back in, whether that's oyster farmers or for the guys that are producing salmon down in Tasmania, those types of smaller vessels, day vessels. We think that there might be, and there's more work to be done. You know, this project will run until the end of the year, but we think that there's opportunities for a battery electric type of conversion. But we've called me sadistic or whatever, but I found that the more complex scenario that needed exploring was, you know, vessels that were out at sea for 2 weeks at a time. So we've front loaded that exploration to try and find solutions for, you know, vessels that are operating in Commonwealth fisheries, because that's a really like the complexity there and the energy density requirements means that we kind of really need to put our thinking caps on. So anyway, so I'm planning on addressing day boats, whether that's, you know, methanol powered outboards or battery electric. So I'll get back to you.
Thanks, Al. Al, I might lob one in, if that's okay.
Sure.
I just had a question on, you know, what you think will be the stop-go point for industry switching away from diesel fuel?
Yeah, I think I don't know that there is actually a scenario here whereby the industry will kind of wake up one morning and say, we've got to chop diesel off at the knees. We'll just, you know, let's just do a wholesale change. I think it needs to be gradual in order to minimize the amount of disruption that might be caused by industry. So, you know, earlier on during my speech, I talked about this is kind of like an evolutionary change rather than revolution. With revolution, there's usually a bit of blood that's spilled and lots of disruption to day-to-day operations of business. And so, you know, one of the reasons why I'm kind of in love with the proposition of a dual fuel engine, it allows us to keep going with business as usual as we repower our engines or replace those engines. Let's go dual fuel. Yes, there's implications from naval architecture and tank sizes or whatever, but it allows us to play the best of both worlds and minimize disruption. So, you know, because that's disruption means lost revenue and profits and so forth. So I don't know that there's many fishing operators that are willing to just kind of dive in head first into a full conversion and ditching diesel, you know, wholesale straight away. So yeah, I think in the lead up to 2030, we need to start making moves. We can't just kind of sit where we are and be washed away by this tsunami of rising diesel prices and changing consumer preferences and you know, the whole world is kind of actively now moving, including Australia now, moving towards energy transition. We can't be caught flat-footed. So yeah, but gradually we'll get there.
Yeah, thanks, Al, which probably brings me into part 2 of my question. And you may have seen Dave's hand gesture and also tying into a question we have from Rachel in the comments. But around the sort of cost of transitioning to some of these fuels, what type of cost would be associated with sort of a refit, but also refueling?
Yeah, so I'll tackle refueling first because that's easier. So in this scenario that I did a head-to-head comparison, the table that I put up. So if you know, let's say vessel operator goes to refuel, let's say they've got double the tank size to accommodate the energy density ratios. They could fill up twice the amount of methanol that they normally fill up with diesel. And because the cost of the methanol is roughly about half, or it's about 2.5 times cheaper, there should be a marginal cost saving to the hip pocket per refueling. So it's not, I mean, this is grey methanol, mind you. So there is, it's not green methanol. Green methanol is going to be more expensive initially, but yeah, so there's no hit to the hip pocket. So from an OPEX perspective, we think that there's going to be pretty immediate returns on that investment. From a CapEx perspective, for an engine conversion, I've read in various different places, statements ranging from $5,000 all the way to $50,000 for the conversion of an engine. So that's running new fuel lines, doing the engineering, putting a higher capacity fuel pump in, and maybe getting a stainless steel fuel tank as opposed to an aluminium fuel tank. So aluminium fuel tanks and methanol don't play nice with one another from a corrosion perspective. So we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars in all likelihood. But yeah, that's still CapEx, right? So there is still a financial impact to be calculated. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. What about though for kind of any refitting of vessels?
So there's kind of two options. One is replace the current engine and buy a brand new, let's call it off-the-shelf engine from whoever it may be, Cummins, Caterpillar, or whoever else once they become available. That's obviously a larger ticket item. But if we're just running new fuel lines and changing the ECU and updating the tanks or whatever, that's the more nominal CapEx expenditure. So maybe hundreds of thousands versus tens of thousands, depending on how many engines you need to replace. So.
Yeah, thank you. And V, we've got a question from you.
Well, actually, I was going to invite David Carter to talk to us about the Austral perspective. So where you feel the development of this project has come and its impacts on Austral and your confidence, I suppose, in the process. Just some feedback around the project from you.
Yep, thanks. No problem, Veronica. I think I've really enjoyed the collaboration. I've become a big fan of Al, so hence the early in the meeting banter. I confess I started this process thinking nice and simple around liquid hydrogen and fuel cells and electric drives, and as we've gone down the many rabbit holes that Al has been diligently exploring, I'm really comfortable with the position that we've got to. For our part, the commitment stands. So the fact that we are currently offsetting all of our emissions has been noteworthy, but we know offsetting for making carbon neutral claims can really, by definition, only be transitionary. We looked at the three different parts of our business in relation to, if you like, challenge levels. The most challenging part of our business is the operation in sub-Antarctic, where these boats load 600,000 litres of diesel and stay at sea for 100 days, and that's going to be really difficult to replace diesel. Next most challenging is little prawn boats that chew through 2,500 litres a day with circa 45,000 litres of fuel on board. So you either sort of double the frequency of mothership servicing, or you find something else special in there, but that's challenging. The one that we thought was a useful stretch, but able to do sort of challenge was our snapper trap operation out of Darwin. These boats, the principal criteria is they're working year round. So any investment we might make in supporting green methanol producers could be sensibly amortised evenly across the year rather than some of the spiky seasonal demands. The boats are using in the order of 750 to 1,000 litres a day. They're doing 2-week trips. They start and finish in Darwin, so we're not having to chase them around multiple ports. 3 of the 5 boat fleet have significantly surplus requirements for fuel storage, so again that would fit. And I think the other drive is it still fits with our narrative. And thanks for your introductory comments, Veronica. But I just figure we need to find another way of running fishing boats other than using diesel. And it's the old thing: if not now, when? If not me, who? So it's been it's been a blessing to have funding support from the FRDC, and then the ability to feed Alan whilst he's gone on this journey. And also not represented here, I think today is the Sunshot consultancy, who are sort of experts in the renewable energy space. So ultimately, for this to really succeed, we've got to encourage a green methanol industry. If through taking a few early moves, we were able to provide project developers with offtake agreements that make those projects viable, perhaps before they would otherwise have been viable, and then that's something I think that we as a business can look to. I'm also mindful that there's an immense amount of interest in this space from all sorts of people, whether it's engine manufacturers, energy suppliers, governments, banks, investors, either impact investors or straight up philanthropists. And we may not have to do all this heavy lifting on our own. Certainly happy to do our share, but the magic here will be around what partnerships and collaborations we can create, and frankly, having a broader industry support, as evidenced by this turnout today, brings that extra heft to decision makers who are writing investment proposals for some of these projects. So, frankly, scale is a big thing. If a significant part of the fish business was able to follow suit, then we quickly become independent of our Saudi oil suppliers, and we fast track what I think can be a really exciting Australian renewable energy business, and a fish business meeting its commitments to Paris and beyond.
Thanks, David. Thanks for giving us that. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot. Alan, I think there's a great comment in the chat from Sarah that I'd like to comment to, but I think we also need to talk about Sunshot and the element that they're bringing to the project, and potentially talk about how far this project will extend in terms of that. But I will just address Sarah's comment around, are you engaging with other agricultural industries on this initiative? From the project perspective, so this is a short, sharp project, short, sharp and furious project to unearth, the business case and the way forward. In this part of the project, we are absolutely keen to work with other industries, but we had some questions to answer of our own. So as we're going into the second part of this, or leading into the December end date of the project, we're absolutely looking to work across. So there's some great conversations to be had there, and we'd love to start having them. But I will hand over to Alan.
Cool. Yeah, I'd like to touch on Sarah's question. When I started working in the blue economy or fisheries seafood innovation space with FRDC back in 2016, it was, I spent probably equal amounts of time, let's call it, in the fishery space as I did in the agricultural space, kind of terrestrial farming. So I've done a lot of work on broadacre cropping, cotton, and variety of different industries in the agricultural space. Because of that background, I couldn't help myself every time I kind of came across outside of the formal confines of this project. I have regularly gone back to my contacts in the agricultural space and compared notes and said, what are you guys doing? What are you finding in your journey? And there doesn't seem to be a lot of focus, I've got to say, from even some of the most innovative players in the agricultural space. Maybe I'm speaking to the wrong people, but I'd love to take you up on your offer to connect with AIA more meaningfully around that. So yeah, I think there's absolutely an opportunity to have a meaningful collaborative dialogue and sharing of notes and so forth. So yeah, thank you. I'll take you up on that.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Let's see, just reading through the rest of the comments here. Oh yeah, so Veronica said the same thing. Oh yeah, yeah. So, were there any other questions?
Alan, maybe just a quick touch on what Sunshot's been contributing to the project, because that.
Oh yeah. So,
that's a really interesting part.
Yeah, the Sunshot team and Lauren in particular from their team is an energy expert. So she's done a huge amount of work with the aviation sector, which is also classified on a global level. Kind of the maritime sector and the aviation sector are called hard to abate sectors when considering the complexity that needs to be factored in with regards to an energy transition to lower carbon fuels or no carbon fuels. And so she's brought a huge wealth of knowledge and expertise from the aviation sector and those fresh perspectives. So she and Susanna and Dylan from their team have been an absolute joy to work with. And it's whilst we've gone off on various tangents, we always come back to the same conclusion, which has been nice. There's never been once yet a moment where we've kind of said, no, I disagree with you, which is a little bit unnerving at times. I just think, I wish I could have a debate where someone says, no, methanol is not the way, or green methanol is not the solution. So we're in violent agreement with each other, which is kind of, it's not totally unnerving. It's actually nice, reassuring moments when when we think, are we crazy or not? So in terms of what the next steps are, the guys from Sunshot are leading the and it touches on one of the questions asked. Sunshot are leading the economic investment case. So they're basically putting forward a series of scenarios and models that they're currently calculating for what will be required for the transition. So where is the fuel? How much will it cost? All that type of thing. So their report will be coming down the pipeline fairly soon. We won't publish that independently, so it'll all come out together at the end of the year when we publish our final report. So watch this space. There's good stuff coming. And to answer Sarah's question, yes, you're more than welcome to get a copy of the slides following the webinar. So I'll provide them to Jess, as Jess is managing the signups for this webinar. And Jess, or you could send me the list of people's names, and I'll distribute it directly. So either way, happy to share.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan. We're probably coming towards the pointy end of the webinar. So if anybody does have any more questions, I do encourage you to drop them into the chat or raise your hand. Gary?
Oh, you're
just on mute there, Gary.
Yeah, sorry. What level of reduction this group striving to get in the fishing industry? Just some, all, 100%, or where are we going? Just for argument's sake, I changed vessels and went from fast aluminium boats with 1,000 horsepower engines to bigger, slower boats at 12 knots and cut my fuel saving down by 50%. And I've done that in the last 2 years. So I've already gained a 50% reduction on the diesel side of things. I'm just wondering how much further I should be looking at going.
Well, the answer, I'll jump in here, Gary. The answer is essentially for us to get to where we need to in 2050, we've got to halve our fuel consumption every decade from here on. So the first target to hit across the economy will be 50% by 2030, based on the work of this decade, and then half again next decade and half again the following decade. So different industries will be able to sort of advance at a different pace. But I think as a rule of thumb, if you look at what you've done is laudable, exemplary, and they're sort of some of the easy things. And again, there's some of the emissions reductions work can be done in other ways, like you've done. But for example, like if you're in a quota fishery, improving your knowledge of the fishery, and reducing your time at sea and catching the same amount can have the same effect. So it doesn't have to be just around like daily reductions in fuel. It's around overall lowering emissions intensity of the products that we sell. And then and I think we're still in generally good shape if we look across ag. Obviously the red meat producers are struggling with endogenous methanogenic emissions, and they've got some challenges there. Broadacre Ag has big inputs in nitrogen fertilizers and fuel running machines. So we're not in bad shape, but I think if we don't have a story around this stuff, then we'll be found wanting.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Oh, Gary.
I was just going to say, with this, what you're actually talking with the fuel supply. I live in a small country town, and getting anything is sort of a bit of a problem. So I don't know what the availability of the stuff you're talking would be around here, green hydrogen, or not hydrogen, but bloody ethanol.
Ethanol, yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing some work around fuel supply or chemical fuel supply, and so I kind of transitioned from being mostly focused on propulsion systems, tanks, conversions, and all that type of thing, to the fuel network, the fuel supply scenario of Australia. So I made that transition about a week ago. So I'm very early in that exploration. But one of the outputs that I'm looking to produce for this project is a map of where methanol is available, where production's looking to come online, what are the challenges and opportunities, and so forth. So yeah, that'll be one of the byproducts of this project. So yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I just put my hand up because I wanted to comment as well on I suppose, Gary, you're talking about what's the industry goal, what's the industry position as well, and I think from an SIA perspective, we want to be aspirational and realistic. We're all in business to make money. There are absolute reasons that we need to be heading down this path, which are environmental and also sustainability and consumer issues. So we'd like to set some targets for industry, a whole of industry approach and some targets, but we just wanted to do a little bit of work into the practicalities of that before we start setting targets that we're unable to meet. So that's from an SIA perspective, we'd love to start setting out. We're going to start setting out some roadmaps and some visions for those approaches as a whole of industry position, and working with Tom and and Austral and Alan is really giving us some good insights there in what we can do. So there'll be more on that. This is a developing space.
So speaking on that, more on that point from Veronica, I will flag as we're coming into the end of this. Number one, anybody who is quite interested in this project and wants to be part of that kind of early adopters and thought leaders group that Tom mentioned, his details are in the chat. I do highly recommend you flagging a quick email with Tom so he knows to keep you guys in the loop and we can start pulling that group together. And on the second point, we have the Seafood Directions Conference coming up next month, so just over 2 weeks now, where we have a couple of panels touching on this topic. So the first one is one with DC, Alan and Tom. And then the second, we have quite an interesting session with DC himself and Martin Excel rounding out our Thursday afternoon. So please, if you're not already coming along to that, definitely pop it in your diary. It will be a topic that is front and centre during the conference. And we only have about 50 tickets left, so they are very quickly selling out. I will just say, Donna, we've actually had a reverse question here from Veronica to you, which I think you might have just responded to, but around what's happening in the New Zealand space with this topic.
I actually went out to a group of fishermen last night and sent I think it was a Facebook post that came up on, I don't know if any of them actually registered, but I do know of 3 new builds recently, so I'm going to follow up and see what they've adopted and just see how up on it the guys are. And if there's a link available after this, I would dearly love to send it out to our local Fishermen's Association and get a bit of feedback from them. I think that'd be really good to, get the awareness happening. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Donna. So Al will be making these slides available. I've been recording this webinar, and we also have an article, sort of a summary article that FRDC put together on the entire project, which I'll share with you.
Okay, been really interesting.
One of the major producers of grey methanol does that out of New Zealand. So yeah. So yeah, we're hoping that our friends in New Zealand will provide us with some grey methanol. So yeah, there's definitely a strong New Zealand Australia link that needs to be established there. So
yeah, this was very evident at the our conference we had in Nelson 2 weeks ago, and of course this time we'll have the New Zealand contingent coming over to you guys in Brisbane. Yeah, it's a pretty full program you've got there. I can see that.
It is absolutely a very full program, but quite exciting as well.
Yeah, no, it'll be good.
All right, final call now for questions. If anybody has anything that they would like to raise, if you're not comfortable raising it during this, as I mentioned, Tom's details and also Alan's are in the chat. And I believe everyone has mine as well, and Veronica's. They're pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's always a nice touch to give everyone back 5 minutes of their giving back time is the current gift of the century, I think. So thank you very much for your time and attention, everyone. Congratulations to the project team. It's been fantastic watching you work. And we're very much looking forward to some results, and we will see everyone at Seafood Directions, we very much hope. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye.
Sarah Customers.